Hello everybody, my name is Manuel. I'm working at Red Hat, principal architect there. And together with my colleague Josie from consulting, we have now the challenging task to be the last talk, and we are between you and the apéro. So we try to make it as short, but yet, how to say, that you're still curious and with us, because we have seen already a lot of things in the Kubernetes world. So we have seen about autoscalers and databases. So the last bit in this journey is actually what can we do with all the services and functionality we have in the cloud? So how can we enable developers, and how can they consume and cope actually with all this complexity? And this is our talk. So we want to talk a little bit about Backstage, which is an internal developer platform, and what we can do about it. So why is it a topic at all? And there are various surveys out, and this is just one of the examples that actually developers are getting more and more under pressure because they need to master so many kind of technologies. So if you want to query different databases, if you want to interact with Kubernetes APIs, you need to be actually an expert in a lot of different topics, not only the programming language anymore, but all the services and frameworks around. So one of the key figures, 67% saying they have actually so much cognitive load that the productivity decreases already. So that means in terms of productivity, so what is a developer actually doing? In essence, I would say coding business logic. So this is the thing which gives you value in the end. All around this, frameworks, tools, Git repositories, and so on, we consider something like developer infrastructure, right? So these are all the supporting tools. So not sure if you recognize this picture. So this is from the London Tube in the rush hour in the morning, but it's actually a very good analogy, and especially in many enterprises. If you want to request a new namespace in Kubernetes and new databases, it's not via self-service, but you need to issue a ticket. Somebody needs to work on it. In some cases, you even need to chase people via email. So what the developers actually want is no ticket, no barriers, no waiting, so fast iterations, get what they need, and they want to try out for sure new things, right? And if it's not working, throw it away and start over. There's also a little bit more an objective approach. So if you look at the timeline, what happened basically in the last 40 years or so, so the truth is that for developers actually, life is not getting easier. So it's always getting something more on top. So at some point of time, we introduced virtualization, container technologies. Nowadays, we're speaking about serverless. So whatever you do, basically, it comes on top, and you need to have at least some kind of grasp what you're doing. If you want to interact with databases, you probably make sure that you understand how connection pools are working, technologies like Kafka, serverless, Kave native. If you want to use scaling probably, or auto-scaling, you also need to make sure that containers are aware how application and the load of the application is working, and all the stuff around. So all of those bits and pieces actually has nothing to do with the real business logic inside, but things which comes on top. And we will explain it a little bit in detail, actually, in live. But just to set the scene, so we in Red Hat, we always talk about the inner loop and the outer loop. So for a developer, basically, the inner loop is what you do on your local machine. It can also be a cloud-based IDE or cloud-based solution, but essentially you have your IDE, you have fast iterations, you build your code, you debug, you compile your stuff, and you iterate through it. And once you are satisfied, you issue a git commit, a push, a merge request, whatever your model is. And this is where your outer loop starts. And this is then where CI/CD kicks in, pipelines, GitOps. I think we also have talked about this already briefly. and until the deployment, and then obviously a staging, right? You usually have development, test, production, or several other stages in between. So this is what we cover with the outer loop. Cool. So as a developer, if I get onboarded, let's say in a new company, right? I'm part of a Java team, maybe a special team. So the first challenge for me is my skill set sharp enough to be productive in this team? So what kind of frameworks, what kind of standards does the team have? And one of the solutions Spotify actually implemented was Backstage. So this was one of the founders, and they donated it to the open source community. We picked it up and productize it now as a developer hub version, but essentially it's Backstage underneath. So this is meant to be a portal where it's something like a cockpit, something like a single pane of glass for developers, where they could find all the relevant information for the day-to-day tasks, right? So if you are in the onboarding stage, you might be interested in a particular team. So I'm part of a Java team, so maybe I want to have some kind of training path or standards I need to read through just to check, okay, am I prepared basically to be productive, right? So that's one of the things you can already provide. It's basically very similar to what we call live bookmarks. What you can see here, I just need to find out how to scroll here. So what typically happens if you have a new guy joining a team is, okay, here you get a buddy, and so like a senior developer, and this guy opens up his laptop, and here you have like 20 or 50 bookmarks I collected over the past 10 years. And probably 50% of them are not working anymore because they are old, they are replaced by other tools or different URLs. So something like this, having a portal where it defines all the relevant standards, different tool sets and so on, maintained and curated by a team is already quite valuable, especially if you are a bigger fleet of developers, so usually a bigger enterprise. But there's also already very helpful for smaller customers as well, because you don't have the need to always have a one-to-one pairing for reoccurring tasks, right? So it's always a little bit challenge on or depends on your needs. The second thing is also quite a trivial functionality, but something like an online catalog of all the application estate in a view of a developer, right? So what is relevant for a developer? And this has nothing to do with the asset database or CMDB, which we maybe know from the old good agile times. So this is really just my microservice architecture, each component of it. So if you're interested in what my developer buddies are doing, I can browse through it. I have a little bit a model behind, so you see like systems and names. So if we drill down, I think we had the e-commerce example today. Let's go there real quick. I can actually view this as part of a topology. And this helps me actually to understand something about the system, right? It's a very simple view, but you can actually imagine that you can create graphs in various complexity. And with this, you can actually also represent microservice approaches. What you also see here, which is very important for developers, is how about APIs, right? Usually you have an API provider, you have consumers. Who are they? How is the definition? Let's go up there a bit. So if we launch the API, I'm in the catalog graph. So let's go here. And one example of the API is maybe the cards API, definition, so gRPC API. So all the relevant information which you need regarding your application, especially in a cloud context, is there. So that's why it's called also single pane of glass, right? Let's go one step further, right? So I grab my first task. I need to create or craft a new microservice as an add-on for my existing application. I can use create application. I will drill down and use my Quarkus application because Quarkus is what we are doing in Red Hat. And it guides me through, and I'm very quick because my colleague will go deeper into this in a second. And I just select the container registry, so I have two choices, either the internal or the external. So I choose the external. The Git repository, quick review. And what this plugin actually is doing in Backstage is it goes out, grabs a prepared template already, scaffolds all the code for me, goes to Git, creates a new repository, it creates a new namespace in OpenShift, it instantiates pipelines, it instantiates a GitOps application, and we are actually ready to go. And how does it look like? So if we drill down to this application, we have now various plugins, and all of these plugins, they're communicating directly with the components. So what you see here underneath is, for instance, the Argo CD plugin, which is for GitOps. And you see that we have actually created an instance. Some of those are already syncing, but some of them might fail because we don't have created a container image yet, right? So we have a pre-production stage, a production development. The build will eventually come up. We also have a link to the Git repositories. So code is always something developers are very interested in. Some very small plugins like TechDocs, which is basically just a renderer for Markdown, which again lives in the code repository. So you can already see that everything as a code is basically the mantra behind. So whatever you see here, including all the definitions of the dashboard, lives as code in Git in the end, right? We also have plugins for pipelines. Here in this example, since we didn't edit any code, I switch quickly to an application I prepared just before. So if you're interested in the pipeline status, this is how I built my application, including all compliance and security measurements. That's why I have these funny icons here with the different colors. I promoted my application via pipelines into pre-production and production. So everything here comes together. And maybe the last thing I can show you, you can combine it even with cloud-based IDE. So if you are a developer or if you are engaged, let's say, in a project and you just need it for, it's already running. So let's choose this one. So if you are just engaged for an infinite or a set amount of time, let's say 2 weeks, so very small project, sometimes it's a hassle, right, to spin up your whole IDE, bring up the right versions you need for your compiler, the right tool sets, and so on. So sometimes it can take actually ages to bring this up. So what you can do is to bring up a solution like this, which is a cloud-based IDE. In this example, it's Visual Code. We also have IntelliJ. And it checks out for you, since we are launching the IDE in context of the application, it checks out the Git repository for you. And there's actually some little thing that you might have seen. It's called a dev file. Not sure if you have seen this, but with a dev file, it's basically a standard all the major IDE vendors understands or supports, and you can describe your development environment, including all the needed versions, CPU and resource allocation for processes you want to give them for debugging and so on and so further. So it checks it out. It also lives in the Git repository, and the IDE understands from this moment on how to be configured to launch this code, right? And you can even define predefined commands. So if you go to run task dev file, so these are some commands I defined here. For instance, I can start development mode, and if you're a Java developer, it should look familiar. So it downloads now a bunch of Maven repository, eventually starts up, and everything lives in the cloud inside a container. So the question is now, how did I get there? So what have I done actually by using this create button? And this is where I hand over to my colleague.
All right. All right, so I'm going to talk to you about the golden path. Sometimes in the Backstage community, this is also referred to as a software template, but yeah, if you see people online in the Backstage context talking about what a software template is, it's basically synonymous to a golden path. Now, why do we need a golden path? So before joining Red Hat, I've actually worked at a bunch of different startups, and a big problem that all these organizations that are scaling quickly, that are onboarding developers, or even enterprises that are in some sort of transformational journey have, is that it's really hard to enforce standards through the organization. So as Manuel said, there's bookmark hell, and everyone sort of does what they want, more or less. There are standards that might be on a Confluence page that no one has updated in half a year or something. And yeah, it's really hard to actually enforce those standards. So the approach we're taking with Golden Paths is to really bake it into templates as much as possible, and to have people, developers, not have to worry about these standards. So they're basically standardized processes. And as everything in the Kubernetes world, basically it's a YAML file. So we've mastered the art of turning YAML files into AWS builds, and now also we're putting processes and standardization in that. And there are different aspects of these golden paths. There's the template part, which, to put it in software terminology, basically defines what you put in and what you get out. So it's like a vending machine. You put in a coin, you select something, you get something. And it defines the sequence of these events, and then also the getting something out. There's an action connected to that, and it can be templating. So if you create some code that gets pushed into a Git repository, for example, like the README, for example, would be updated, or other parts like the Helm chart, the whole Argo configuration, all that can be templated and integrated. And just to sort of visualize this a little bit more, we start with this template part, then there's this scaffolding, which is the Backstage terminology for it, which is basically like a Helm template, but it's not actually Helm underneath. And then in the end, there's the action, so doing things. And I'm going to show you how this actually works in practice. So this is the template editor for the create the Quarkus app template we just saw earlier. And so we start with the params, which is basically what you put in. So you can define all these inputs. So we have the preview right here. Something, yeah, we can type CNC, Meetup. And we can pick an owner here. Oh, yeah, I picked the wrong thing, sorry. All right, now I'm looking at the right thing. I was already confused. So these are the things you can define here. So this is the form that the developer interacts with in the end. And something cool you can do here, for example, is you can add the Meetup group, and that will immediately show up here. And if you want, this is the value that the template or the action will then pick up and interact with. But if you want it to show up differently for the user, for example, you can also give it an enum name and then give them different names. Devs. And yeah, you get that preview right there as well. And you can do more fancy things with that. So if I were to create this namespace like that, does anyone know what would happen? So it would not work because there are spaces in it, and yeah, Kubernetes doesn't want you to have spaces in your namespace. So if I as a developer right now were to run this, it wouldn't work. And developers want things to work. How do you get around that? You can bake regex validation into it. So for the namespace property here, for example, prepared something earlier, you can add this pattern. And now if I try to submit it like that, it will not work. So yeah, this is an example of how you can bake this kind of validation in there. I'll quickly go to the actual steps, which is the sequence of events that are defined in there. And here we have different actions. So this is the templating part. If I go to the repository real quick, we have a skeleton directory. And this includes basically all the components that we'll want to template in our target. So this is the whole project setup for the backend app. And maybe we can see it here. It's a good example. So this might look familiar. It's like it's a templating language that is baked into these. And these values then get overwritten by what the user puts into these fields. So we have these different actions here. This is publishing it to GitLab. So the step we saw there. Registering the source is making it show up in the catalog afterwards. And then the last part is the GitOpsing. All right, and at the end you can also define the output. So when you're done with the process, you might want to go look at your code. It'll show up there, and you're ready for takeoff, basically, as a developer. Okay. So we saw the rationale behind why a golden path is a good idea. We saw how it works, more or less, in a fast-forward way. And now we'll see the impact you can actually have with a golden path. So this is a case study from the US. And I picked out 3 metrics. There were like 10 metrics in the case study. So I picked out my 3 favorite ones. So those are the different use cases that they used Backstage for to automate some of these processes. And as you can see, the time saving is really significant. I mean, I think a lot of you can imagine if you've ever worked in a large enterprise and you've tried to open up a firewall rule or something, it can take a significant amount of time. So I think we're all very hungry, but we're still open for questions as well. Don't you want to?
Yeah. So I think what you have seen is right. It's basically a method or a concept behind where you can build basically kind of an abstraction for your developers. So you don't need to necessarily know about something about YAML or Kubernetes objects. You can cover this in workflows we call golden path. And you can bake in actually a lot of requirements you have in your company, such as security, compliance. And that's why it's also called golden path, right? It's like a product or a service you as a platform team can provide to your customers in the end, right? So developers are kind of a customer of a platform. And with this, you actually become the developers because you are like the advocates, right? You are telling them, hey, stay with us on the golden path. This is your insurance. Everything will work. If you have good reasons, you want to do it differently, you can do it. We offer choice, right? But then it's up to you also to gain compliance and all the security you need to achieve. So that's why it's always good to be kind of advocate on a level where you reduce the cognitive load. So this is how you actually make also platforms successful in the end. This is our key message. And yeah, with this, I think we are open for questions if there are any. Otherwise, we are still around in the upper hall a bit. You can approach us if you like. Thank you.